Today on the Transplant Helper, I'm going to be addressing a subject, really, to tell you the truth, I've been avoiding for quite some time, and that is the possibility of an unsuccessful transplant. What I mean by that, very simply stated, is that you go out and have a transplant, you're hoping for better and brighter days, and that's simply not the case. For all extents and purposes, your quality of life is not improved, therefore you might deem your transplant as unsuccessful. Is that possible? Is it something we need to know about, or maybe a loved one? If that's the case, go ahead and stay tuned. Hey folks, welcome to the Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle. You know as well as I do that if you've been watching this program for very long, my intention in every single episode is to either advocate, educate, and or motivate you as a transplant patient. However, I need to be totally honest today and say that this particular program is not that much of a motivator, okay? Given the subject matter, the unsuccessful transplant, this is probably not going to motivate a lot of people out there. However, I don't want you to see this as a negative subject overall. And that's because this is just one of those subjects that we kind of have to deal with. We kind of have to lay there on the table, make it available and known to people, especially pre-transplant patients. They have to be aware that every single transplant case will be different and every single one of them will not be a 100% success. And if it's not going to be 100% success, then that ends up saying that there are going to be some failures along the way. Now, for the majority of us, not just us really, but especially the general public, most people, when they think about transplant, they think about a cure, okay? They think about someone who's been in some sort of organ failure, whether it's heart, lung, liver, kidney, pancreas, whatever those major organs. They've been in organ failure for a certain period of time. The doctors have thrown out the option there for them of having an organ transplant, and then once that's said and done, things are over, they move on with life, and life is going to be great. And I will say this, for the vast majority of us, that's the basic story. It's not that simple, you know that. It's not that easy, but that's kind of the basic story. You have a transplant, you get better, you get stronger after that transplant, and most likely you meet with a life that is more successful and better than you've ever known. That's why I always end every program by reminding you as the viewer to stay stronger, friends. I'm saying that because I want you to be stronger, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I want you to be stronger. And transplant allows you an opportunity to do that in most cases. However, there are going to be some cases, and this is just the honest, bold truth about it. There are going to be some cases, however, where transplant is either not the answer, or at least it doesn't result in the ultimate answer. I've said on many occasions, some people argue with me, and that's okay if you choose to do so, but I've said on many occasions that we always need to keep in mind that transplant is a treatment, not a cure. Okay, transplant is just another treatment, like taking medications, like having any other operation, like having some sort of procedure. It's not the end all and be all that solves all your problems. You may be in heart failure pre-transplant, you get a transplant, you do well for a number of years, maybe decades, and then that heart fails. Why? Because that is a human organ. It still has the possibility out there of failure, given the fact also that you're on so many medications, immune suppressants, antivirals, steroids, one big one there that's hard to deal with in the first years or so. You know, there are a lot of medications that are really, really hard on your system or your body as a whole that cause other things to happen post-transplant. So it's just kind of one of those things we need to be aware of, that it's not going to be an easy life, and it is a treatment, not a cure. Okay. But with that being said, you know, again, the majority of us have a great experience post-transplant. The majority of us, looking back at our transplants, whenever they were, whether they were just a few months ago or years ago, even decades ago, probably would say about our transplants, yes, I don't regret it. If I had to do it again, I would. And you know, it has improved my life. And that is most likely the case. I would just make up a number of saying for 99% of cases, that might seem to be the case. And of course, that's not a statistical number. As a matter of fact, I'll probably disprove that in a moment, but a lot of us do experience a great success because of transplant, okay? But we also need to think about some realities here. I've been contacted in the last few months several different times, not by a lot of people, but by people who mattered. But I've been contacted several different times by spouses particularly, and or patients, but mostly spouses who ask, Jim, what's going on with my husband? What's going on with my wife, my child, even sometimes? Why are they not having the success that I see on your channel? Why are they not having the success that I see in these support groups? Well, basically, there's not a real answer to that. I don't know why your loved one is not seeing that kind of success, but I do know that it has to be known with transplant that it is not going to be easy, number one. And number two, it's not always going to be a complete success, okay? And to some people looking at it from the outside, it may not be a success at all. It may be a complete failure. It may be something that you might regret one day, but always keep in focus the fact that this person, whoever it is, whether it's you or a loved one, this person who was facing transplant was only facing that because their organ, whichever one it was or multiples, their organ or organs were failing and they were not going to live much longer. You see, for example, in the heart transplant world, if you're listed as a status 1A, the actual assumption, they don't necessarily tell you this, but the actual assumption by listing a patient as status 1A is the doctors have made a guesstimation based on statistics that you will not live longer than a month if you're not don't receive the transplant. Now, do people live longer than that? Absolutely they do. Many people are listed as status 1As for numbers of months or years, and they make it. But that's kind of the luck of the draw. That's kind of a matter of chance there. A certain blessing, yes, but a matter of chance in a way too. It's not the norm, okay? So to be listed for transplant at any level, but especially at that higher levels on your particular organ system, to be listed at that highest level means that your possibility of living for long, very long, was pretty low. Okay, so keep that in mind in the beginning. But let me bring a few numbers up besides that to let you know that it is possible that you may have an unsuccessful transplant. And again, not a subject I want to discuss, just one I have to be honest about. And the first number comes up in the way that transplant centers typically are rated, or they rate themselves. A lot of times when you get on the internet, and we're big in the internet now, and you can do Google searches and find this information pretty readily, but we get on the internet and we begin to research various transplant centers. There are I won't say hundreds, they're not hundreds, but there are a ton of transplant centers scattered around the country, all of which are boasting about their numbers. They're saying we have a such and such percentage success rate. We have this percent or that percent. Some transplant centers honestly have higher success rates for certain organs than they do others. And they have higher success rates for certain organs than any other center might. For example, UAB Transplant Center at the time of my transplant had like an 89% success rate, just in a general rule of thumb for heart transplants. Now, compared to other centers, that was actually pretty good at the time. It's still pretty good. I don't know what it is today, but it's still pretty good. They have a great rate for organ transplants. They've done over 14,000 organ transplants total. Many of those have been hearts in the last decade or so. So yeah, they've got a good track record. You might find a transplant center that has a different number than that, a little higher, a little lower, but the vast majority of transplant centers claim to have somewhere in the neighborhood of an 85 to maybe 95% success rate. You won't find a whole lot of centers that claim anything higher than that. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. So 85 to 95% is kind of the accepted norm of what transplant centers claim. However, there's a lot of variables that go into that in those numbers. I'm not saying they necessarily juice their numbers, but keep in mind that every transplant center, the doctors there in those clinics, they get to select, handpick the patients that they choose to do transplants on. Yes, they have to meet it with national criteria. They have to qualify to be on the list, say with UNOS and other listing, programs and such. But at the end of the day, it's the individual doctors at the transplant center who get to say, well, patient A is going to be listed, patient B will not. And a lot of times what they'll do, if they're having trouble with their success rates, what they're going to do is they're not going to be taking high-risk patients for a while. So they're not going to be, just grabbing anyone and everyone that may qualify. They're going to take those patients that they really believe, okay, if we transplant this patient, they're going to have the highest outcome success rate in the end. And so sometimes that's why some center may turn you down, and then you apply at a different transplant center, they pull you right in, because some transplant centers are working working on their numbers a little bit, to be honest about it. They're trying to make sure they pad the numbers. Other transplant centers are trying to pioneer those numbers. They're trying to say, look at the patients we worked with, how much of a mess they were in, and look at where we brought them. And so both of them can be seen successful in their own right. So say someone had a 95% success rate over here, but they don't take high-risk patients. Somebody with an 85% success rate over here may be a very good transplant center because they do take high-risk patients. And so obviously their numbers are going to be different. But aside from that, here's one thing that most people don't realize about those survival rates. Say a transplant center says we have a 95% successful and survival rate at a certain point. All transplant centers, okay, I'm not saying they don't keep other data, but all transplant centers are looking for 3 dates to qualify for, okay? They're looking for the 1-year survival rate, the 3-year survival rate, and the 5-year rate, okay? So basically, they're only being measured by the number or percentage of patients that are surviving 1, 3, or 5 years, okay? That's it. So if you're a 10-year survivor, yeah, they're going to claim you. They're proud of you, but that really doesn't play into what you would call their status. It doesn't play in so much to their percentages. At the same time, they're basically trying to get you through those hurdles. So if they can transplant a patient, if you can make it to a year, that's a plus on everybody's part. Obviously yours, but a plus on their part. If you can make it to 3 years, that's another notch in their belt, okay? Great and wonderful thing on both parties. And if you can make it to 5 years, wow, they have really accomplished something there, and that is great. And depending on your organ, again, whether it's heart, lung, liver, kidney, pancreas, whatever, the survival expectations may be longer or shorter. For example, the national average survival rate right now in the moment, for a heart transplant patient is about 8 years and 6 months. Now, some will say 10, some will say less than that. Back when I was transplanted, I was told 5, but right now it's about 8.6 years. Not to say that there aren't tons of people out there who live much longer than that. Many of you, I'm looking into your faces right now. You're past the 8.6. You're in the 20-year marks, okay? Some are headed toward the 30-year marks. That's awesome, okay? I'm excited about that. I know you are. What a blessing that is. But the average statistical result for a heart transplant survival right now is at 8.6. Again, you'll get varied numbers on that. I'm not arguing, so I don't want to argue about it, but that's what it is. For a lung transplant, however, totally different organ, the average survival rate post-transplant at a year is at about 4 and 6 months. So 4 years and 6 months is the average survival rate. Now, again, I hope and pray everybody beats that, okay? I hope and pray we go farther than that. Many have. That's great. Wonderful. But I'm telling you what the national averages are right now. So again, what's happening there? Well, the transplant centers are trying to get to the 1, the 3, and the 5-year marks. That's what they want. That's certainly what you want. And then from that point, they're trying to get you above the national average. And that really makes them look good. And certainly it benefits our lives when they strive for that, when they're grasping at that and working toward that. That's a benefit for all of us. But what does that mean? Well, to use that best case scenario, if a transplant center predicts that they will have a 95% survival rate at 1 year, what does that mean? 5% will not live past a year or 2 a year. 5% won't make it. If they're claiming a little lower percentage at 3 years, which would be obvious they would, that percentage won't make it. 5 years, that percentage won't make it. Exceeding that 5-year mark, a higher percentage won't make it. Okay, transplant is a treatment, not a cure. Transplant is a wonderful blessing. It is a great thing. I don't take away anything from it. I hope you wouldn't. But we have to meet with reality. So the lady a few months ago who contacted me and said, Jim, what's going on? I hate to request it. Would you please make an episode and tell people, especially spouses like me, that it's not all going to be a bed of roses, that my husband and her husband, I won't tell his whole story, but her husband had a transplant. They assumed everything would be great. He basically never woke up. No explanation. Another person who I've known in the past had a transplant. They expected things to be great. Here they are a little over a year or so out, they're still on dialysis, okay? They had heart transplant, but they're still on dialysis for the kidneys. That's, again, not the majority, but it is a minority of people. Not to mention the fact that, yes, those medications are taking a toll on our system. Yes, I use this number sometimes and it shocks people, but 80%, I can't do 80% on my fingers, but 80, is that 8%? 80% of people will meet with some form of cancer within the first 3 years of transplant. Now, it may be a skin cancer. It may not even be something that you notice, but you're supposed to be going to the dermatologist regular. You're supposed to be avoiding the sun, wearing sunscreen, but 80% will meet with some form of cancer post-transplant. I've already had 2 removed from my back. It's the way it is. That could potentially take us. It may not be our organ failure. It may not be what they call the graft failure. Same thing. It may be something else. Viral. I've lost so many friends who were doing well with their transplant, but because they got sick, they caught the flu, they caught this bug or this virus, they lost their lives. It's not perfect. Now, could that happen to anyone in the general public? Yeah, anybody could get cancer. Many do. Anyone could get sick. Many do. But when you're immunosuppressed, when you're struggling, when your body's working so hard to heal, the likelihood is increased to an extent and to a percentage. All I'm trying to say, and I realize I've been rambling for a while, but this is something that really, in a way, it tears at my heart. I hate to mention it or bring it up, but transplant is a wonderful gift, but it's not always the perfect option. And it's certainly not always 100% a success. Accomplishments that can be made, yes. I've been through 1 year, 3 years. I'm right there just past the 5-year mark. I hope to break records. I hope all of you do. But I have to see reality too. And I was thankful at the time that when I was going through all those transplant evaluations, that my team, at least, everyone doesn't, but my team, especially one of my doctors particularly, my pediatric cardiologist from my childhood, he was so honest with me, telling me about these statistics, telling me about these numbers, and telling me, you know what? I want you to go through with this. He encouraged me to do it, but he said, don't expect this to be the end all and be all to solve all your problems, because it won't. Wonderful gift. Now, what can we do about it? Well, number one, I think most importantly, those of us who are willing to and will, we need to be praying about the situation, okay? You need to be praying for your friends, your family members, people you hadn't even met. Lift their name up in prayer and beg that they not only receive their transplant, but that it be a success and they survive and live many, many days and years as a result. Pray for that. But number two to that, encourage organ donation, okay? A lot of times the reason people don't make it to transplant or even don't do as well post is because they got so sick leading up, or they had to get so sick leading up because the organs weren't available. And myself, you also, we are the best advocates possible for organ donation because we're the people who are either needing the organs or living the life with the organs. We're walking testimonies to the gift of life and how important it is. You and I need to be the ones, beating doors, going in the highways and byways, posting on social media, begging and pleading with people to consider organ donation, because the actuality is that if the organs were available so people could be transplanted quicker, they would probably do better in the end. The healthier we are going into transplant, the possibility of our health is better coming out. So just simply raise awareness. Again, I know this has been lengthy and I've kind of been rambling, but you're willing to watch it to the end. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate you. If you'd like to support the Transplant Helper program at all, I'll put a link in the description below. I'm not wearing it today, obviously. It's my Donate Life shirt, which you can go online and find those. But if you'd like to support the program, how about buy a Transplant Helper t-shirt? The link will be below. As well as the fact, as I said a moment ago, go ahead and thumbs up this program. Share it out with your friends and family if you can help. Consider subscribing. And always remember that I'm standing behind you on every front. Okay, if you have any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to talk about, please reach out to me. Any subject it is, please reach out to me. I'd enjoy hearing from you. Also, in addition to that, there's oftentimes some videos I put up here beside me on the video. Sometimes my videos, sometimes the videos of others, all educational type material for the transplant life. So since you're already on YouTube, why don't you go ahead and keep on watching that? And let me remind each and every one of you, until next time, please, my friends, stay stronger.